There is a hunger so old most of us have stopped recognizing it as hunger. It lives underneath the clothes we chose carefully this morning. Underneath the opinions we adjusted slightly before sharing them in the meeting. Underneath the laugh that came half a second too eager, the story we edited on the way out of our mouth. The version of ourselves we sent into the room while the real one waited outside in the car. It is the hunger to belong. Not to be tolerated, not to be included on a technicality, but to be known, fully, specifically, without performance, and chosen anyway. We have been chasing that feeling since the first day we understood that the world had preferences. That some versions of us were welcomed, and others were not. That belonging, like so many things we needed most, appeared to be conditional, and so we began the long work of becoming conditional. We became whoever the room needed us to be, and the belonging we were chasing moved further away with every adjustment we made toward it. This is the paradox of belonging. Priya was 37 years old and had spent her entire adult life being exceptionally good at fitting in. She was the daughter of Indian immigrants who had settled in a small Ohio town where she was, for most of her childhood, the only person who looked like her in every room she entered. She had learned early, with the particular speed of children whose survival depends on reading social environments accurately, exactly what each room required. At school, she was fully American. She flattened her cadences, swapped her lunch, laughed at references she sometimes didn't understand, and became fluent in the specific performance of belonging to a place that had not entirely decided whether it wanted her. At home, she was fully her parents' daughter. She spoke Gujarati, observed the rituals, honored the expectations, inhabited a completely different self with a completeness that would have impressed an actor. And somewhere in the space between those two performances, the actual Priya, the one who existed when no audience was present, became harder and harder to locate. By the time she reached her 30s, she was extraordinarily socially skilled and profoundly lonely. She had friends in every category of her life and felt genuinely known by almost none of them. Because the person they knew was a careful composition, a Priya assembled for their specific context. The unassembled version had not been shown to anyone in so long she was no longer sure what it looked like. The crisis came quietly, the way Priya's crises always came, not with drama, with a dinner party. She was sitting at a table full of people she genuinely liked, performing warmth she genuinely felt, and she had a moment, sudden, disorienting, impossible to explain, of complete dissociation from herself. She watched herself laughing from a slight distance, watched herself being charming, being interested, being exactly what the evening required. And she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, nobody here would notice if I switched. Not because the people were shallow, they weren't, but because what they were responding to, what they liked, what they laughed with, what they leaned toward, was not Priya. It was Priya's most socially optimized output, and optimized output, however excellent, is not a person. She drove home alone that night and sat in her driveway for a long time, and asked herself a question she had never seriously entertained. Who would I be if I stopped trying to be what people needed me to be? She didn't have an answer, and the not having an answer was, itself, the most honest thing she had felt in years. On the other side of the country in Seattle, a man named Theo was learning the same lesson through a different kind of disappearing. 32 years old, software engineer, quietly funny in the way that only people who are paying close attention can be. He had grown up gay in a religious household in rural Georgia, which is to say, he had grown up understanding from a very young age that the fullness of who he was could not safely occupy the space he was given. He had left Georgia at 18 with the specific relief of someone escaping something they cannot name while they are inside it. He had built a life in Seattle that was, by every measure, free. He was out, he was successful. He was surrounded by people who would have had no issue whatsoever with every true thing about him. And he was still performing. Not the Georgia performance, that one he had retired with relief, but a new one. A curated, specific version of a gay man in Seattle that matched the aesthetic and the reference points and the particular cultural fluency his social world seemed to require. He had swapped one costume for another and called it liberation. The music he actually loved, he kept quiet. Too country, too southern, too reminiscent of a version of himself his new life had no room for. The faith he still privately wrestled with. Complicated, unresolved, genuinely his C. He never mentioned because it didn't fit the character he had constructed. The homesickness he sometimes felt for a place that had not been safe for him. That he kept most carefully hidden of all, because it made no sense, and he had learned that the things about him that made no sense, were the things most likely to cost him his place in a room. Theo was free, and he had used his freedom to build a slightly more comfortable cage. Here is where the paradox lives. Belonging, real belonging, the kind that actually satisfies the hunger, requires being known. Not the curated version, not the optimized output, not the self that has been carefully assembled to match the room's requirements. the actual self. The contradictory, unresolved, doesn't quite fit any single category, self. But we cannot be known if we will not be seen, and we will not be seen if we are afraid that what is seen will be rejected, and so we perform. And the performance works. People like us, include us, invite us back. The performance is successful by every external measure, but the belonging it produces is belonging to a fiction. And some part of us, the part that is still hungry, still watching from the car while the performance goes on inside, knows it. The loneliness of being liked for who you are not is a specific and particularly quiet kind of suffering. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You have friends, you have community, you have all the markers of a person who belongs. And you have never felt more alone. Because you are alone. The real you is alone. Sitting in the parking lot of your own life, waiting to be invited in. Priya's shift began with a single act of deliberate exposure. She had a friend, her oldest friend, a woman named Layla, who had known her since college. And she called her on a Sunday afternoon and said something she had never said to anyone. I don't think you actually know me, and I think that's my fault, and I want to try to fix it. Layla was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I've been waiting for this conversation for 15 years. What followed was not a single dramatic revelation, but a slow, uncomfortable, deeply necessary series of them. Priya showed Layla the part she had kept compartmentalized, the tension between her American self and her Indian self that she had never resolved, only managed. The loneliness of the dinner party, the question she had sat with in her driveway, the fact that she had spent so long being good at fitting in that she had lost track of what she actually fit. Layla listened, did not flinch, did not reassemble her understanding of Priya with any visible effort, because, and this is the part that undid Priya completely, Layla, since he had always sensed these things, had always felt the edges of the real person just beneath the performance, had loved what she could see of her and wanted more. The wanting more had been there all along. Priya had just never believed it was safe to give it. Theo's moment came at a house party in Capitol Hill, where someone put on a country song. Accidentally, ironically. The way people put on country songs, at parties in Seattle. And Theo felt the specific physical response of a song that lives in your body before your mind has time to curate your reaction. He laughed, genuinely, and said, without thinking, without running it through the filter first, I actually love this song. I grew up on this. The room did not end. Nobody reassessed him. His friend Marcus raised an eyebrow and said, okay, tell me everything, with the particular delight of someone who has just discovered an unexpected dimension of a person they thought they knew. And Theo, for the first time since leaving Georgia, talked about where he came from. Not the sanitized version, not the version edited for a liberal coastal audience. The complicated version, the version where the place that hadn't been safe for him was also the place that hadn't been safe for him, was also the place that had shaped every true thing, where the music and the landscape and the particular quality of summer evenings were written into him at a level no amount of reinvention could reach. The Rue leaned in, not despite the complication. Because of it. Because people, real people, people worth belonging to, are not looking for the performance, they are looking for the person. And the person, with all their contradiction and unresolved complexity, and doesn't quite fit any single category truth, is so much more interesting than anything the performance could ever produce. Theo drove home that night feeling something he didn't immediately have a word for. He found it eventually. It was relief. The specific relief of a person who has been holding something for a very long time, and has finally, in the presence of someone safe, been allowed to put it down. The paradox of belonging does not resolve by finding better people to perform for. It resolves by ending the performance. Not all at once, not recklessly, not by walking into every room and announcing every unedited truth about yourself to whoever happens to be present, but slowly, deliberately, by choosing one relationship at a time, to show a little more of the actual thing, to let someone see the part you usually keep in the car, to risk the specific vulnerability of being known, really known, and discovering whether the belonging that follows is the real kind. The real kind feels different. It is quieter than the performed kind, less immediately gratifying. It doesn't produce the quick warmth of a room responding to your best social output, but it lasts. It compounds. It becomes the thing you return to when the performing has exhausted you, and you need to remember that someone knows where you actually live. Priya found it at 37, Theo at 32. Both of them, in different cities, through different kinds of hiding, arrived at the same discovery. The people worth belonging to were never looking for the performance. They were looking for the person. And the person, unassembled, unoptimized, complicated, and contradictory and contradictory, and a contradictory and a contradictory, and a contradictory, and had been more than a fist since before the performance began. This has been the paradox of belonging. Whoever you have been leaving in the car, whatever version of yourself you've decided, is too much, too complicated, too unresolved to bring into the room. Someone in that room has been waiting for exactly that person. You just have to let them in first.